In this video, frames finally get their places. Welcome back to follow my sailboat build project. My name is Panu and I am building this 15-meter liveaboard cruising sailboat you can see behind me there. It should eventually look something like this. So far in this project we have been mostly making these frames. Just bear with me, they are essential part of this structure, so just a couple of more times, okay? But let's take a little bit of a look what else has been happening here so far, so that all the new viewers get a little bit of an understanding what's happening in here. So in addition to these frames, there's few things that already are in this boat. It starts with these plywood sheets that are the foundation to what the boat is actually laid onto. They're just thick plywood sheets that are attached to the ground, and these larger bolts are the adjustment bolts to make them all being on the same level. And they are not part of the boat, but this next part is. And this is the bulwark of the boat. The boat is obviously upside down. So this will be the bulwark, and the bulwark will be completely flat with the waterline. And there is 2 sheets of CNC cut plywood there that forms the bulwark. Then this piece is the inner wall of the bulwark. It is 2 layers of 15mm or 16mm, some of you may know, plywood. There's a scarf joints to join them all together, and they are glued together like this. And finally, this part here is the side deck. And this is the part we're going to be walking onto when the boat is turned right side up. So those are the pieces of the boat we have done and installed so far. Then all the rest of this stuff, this one in here and these here, are just molds to keep everything on their places and in right locations. And basically everything you can see here is cut with CNC to very precise accuracy. And so far it has been working mostly well. This middle mold is particularly important. We got it installed last spring, and it has all of these slots for the frames to sit in right position. There is some other slots for the temporary frames we're going to do eventually. And then there is some additional placements for mast steps, rudder and stuff like that in this mold. So this is very important, and I'm really happy how it turned out. Everything should be okay, except for my tolerances are not really correct. Of course, because the main issue with all this build so far has been the variation in thickness of plywood. So as you can see, this frame is here, it's on its place, but it won't go down because this plywood is slightly thicker than it should be. It's a matter of few millimeters, but still, and it creates some, not big, but small issues. That said, I need to use some additional tolerances in future in connections like this. And then there is of course the stem that has been done. The spring this year was very cold and miserable, but I still got the middle mold done, and that is absolutely amazing. After that, the summer has been super hot, really too hot to do anything in this tent, except of course the 1 week we did a sailing trip in June with my wife. That was the coldest week of whole summer. I've also been taking a little bit easier just because there has been a lot of stress about the work situation. There is really a depression in building industry right now in Finland, and yeah, that brings the lack of work and lack of money, which has been quite stressful really. After installing the middle mold, I started to figure out the installation of the frames, and first thing I had to do was to trim this edge in here, which had some extra material on it. It wasn't really a big deal, it was just a few minutes of power planing on each side, and what was done quite quickly. During the spring I already had done a few of the frames, as you may remember, I might have shown you that. And I tried a few different tools and methods to do it efficiently, but eventually the process was something like this. So I will go now through basically the process of how I shape these frames. It obviously started by taking the frame from the pile to be shaped in the first place, and you can maybe see that it's really cumbersome and difficult to handle these because their center of mass is quite odd. By putting the bottom on the table and these arms on those stands gave me a pretty good access for all of the frame to go around. First I removed most of the material with the drill from these notches, and then I started to shape it with the multi-tool. And I have to say, this multi-tool, as annoying as it is, the sound is just infernal and gets into you. It was probably the most useful tool to do this shaping. And before I tried to use different tools for making this initial shaping, but eventually I got into conclusion it was most efficient just to make it as accurate as possible in the first go. So it kind of worked well, a little bit tedious, took a bit of time, but not that bad. And not to confuse, this footage is combined from several frames. The same was done for the keel pocket and those frames that had these ballast keel slots. The procedure was pretty much the same for them as well. Then it was time to grab the electric planer. Here I first take some epoxy residues off the surface. The actual shaping was pretty straightforward. After a few frames I got pretty accurate with the planer alone and kind of got a good feel with that, so that I could get most of the shape done with the planer. After the initial shaping was done, I sanded the top surface of the frame just to get rid of all the epoxy squeeze out and remains from that surface, and the final task was to route off the excess plywood from the inside edge. After the first side was done, it was time to flip the frame over to get access to the other side. These frames weren't that heavy, but as mentioned, their center of mass is pretty difficult to handle, but I just managed to lift them with my hands, and I was tall enough to move them around like this, and that was definitely the easiest way to do it. After flipping, the procedure was repeated on the other side, shaping the edge, finishing all those notches, sanding the whole surface and routing the edge. The final thing to finish the surfaces and all the notches was to grab the narrow belt sander, which was the second really essential tool to be able to shape all these notches and kind of finish the surface. This process took quite a while, but I think this was the only way to really get into the finish I wanted and to get the shape accurate enough. The shape of the wood inside there doesn't matter that much. It will be filled with epoxy glue eventually, but I wanted to get it shaped underneath the edges of the plywood, which is really the shape I need. And the very last task was to sand the whole surface with the belt sander. I actually didn't have this belt sander with the first frames, but I purchased it in the summer, and it really helped to get the final shape of the frame outside surface to be really good. All the sanding papers I used were 40 grit, so the surface isn't really very smooth but kind of rough. That should help to glue them with epoxy eventually. And when the frame was done, it needed to be lifted on the boat. I just managed to lift all these biggest frames as well. I'm just tall enough to lift them up, and really without this middle mold this wouldn't be possible. I kind of just wiggled it around all the frames and took them on their places, and the boat started eventually look like a boat. The same process was repeated for all of the frames. It took about 4 hours per frame to do, and this one here is the last frame, and you got to see this in just a few minutes. Lucky you.
Done.
However, the job with the frames isn't finished just yet. The fact that this plywood is thicker than it should have been brings that the frames don't fit here perfectly. So I need to go through every of the frames and trim them a little bit more in here just to make sure that they fit exactly where they need to go. The important thing really is to match this outer surface of the frame with the Bulwark edge right here, so that the blanking will eventually land in here. So in this case, for example, it's quite close, but I still need to trim some out of here to fit this on its place down there. This frame 1 right here has been fitted already, and it fits super well in there. So I'm really happy to see that this system works, and I probably can fit all the frames exactly like this. So all the frames need to be fitted, and there is quite a lot of work with that still, but we'll get into that later. Now let's take a look at the next tasks I have now when these frames are on their places. So the process I've been using here is quite different from other channels I've been following. And the main idea here really is to put as much structures in the boat at this stage before we do the actual planking. In most cases, you do the hull of the boat and then flip it around and then start to put things inside that hull. But in my case, I think it's very good idea to put as much things into the boat when you have a good access in here. So that's the idea. And I actually thought about putting some interior in here as well at this stage, but I eventually decided that I really want to see the interior and the inside volume before I do any final decisions of the interior design. So not that much things gonna go inside the boat, but all these structures will go, and basically after the hull is complete, it will be fully functional sailboat hull with all the necessary structures. And when everything is CNC cut, they should be pretty accurate so that the interior should go quite easily in there, if I remember to utilize the tolerances enough. In one of the previous videos, I did the basic idea of the phases, what is going on in here. And the phase 1 was to put everything here on the ground, and the phase 2 really started with the middle mold. But after that, I've been kind of thinking a lot and just looking around and figured out what I need to do next and if there is some issues with those stages. And there is a couple of things I need to change. One of the most important things are the mast steps. They will be placed in here. This is the frame 1, this is the frame 3, and here will be the frame 2, and there is a mast step notch in here. Those are steel parts that need to be manufactured. I don't have money to buy them just yet, but they will be installed before the frame 2 can be installed in here. But I figured out that when the mast step is here and the frame is here, and I need to put some packing on each of the side, and it will be bolted through those. So I can't have this frame 1 in here or this frame 2 in here before that bolting process has been done. This will be on the way if I try to put the bolts in here. So that needs to go in first before I can glue and install these 2 frames on each side. And it's the same thing here in the middle mast. This is the frame 11, which will go with the mast, and the mast step will be right in there. But there is also another thing, and it is these ballast keel structures that will be installed in these slots in these frames right here. Those will be done from oak, and the oak planks will be gone through these slots, and I can't have this next frame installed in here so that I can put the planks through these holes. So there's a few things I need to make sure that I got in right order to be able to install them. So that will change a little bit of the process I mentioned in that earlier video, of course. Then there is this stem area and this frame 0, which is the first frame in the boat. And here is the slot for this frame. But of course you can see this is actually a ring frame that goes around. And fitting it in here is a little bit difficult because I made a small mistake. I didn't count the ring frame property of this frame, so I actually need to cut this mold right here and put this frame in and then attach the mold back. And that has to be done before I can start putting the stem piece in here, of course, because this frame 0 is under the stem. The stem will extend in here and it will be glued together from here. So this needs to be done first. But I think this task is something I can do pretty soon because it really doesn't affect any of those other frames. So this is something I can start with very soon actually. But before that, what I actually have already started figuring out is this area here in the stern. So this will be the stern of the boat. This is the last frame. And between this and the next one, there is going to be a huge structural area with rudder stock right about there. And then there is this slot in here that you can maybe see, which is the placement for the wind vane pipe that will go somewhere around here. This area is particularly interesting because there's a lot of shape in it. It will have a lot of features, and I have already started to figure out how I'm gonna do this. I'm probably gonna utilize CNC as much as possible to get the right shape, and it's also fairly large, so I have to do it in sections. And I think this area is something we're gonna do next, and you will see in the next boat build video, of course. And finally, there is one general thing alongside everything else that I want to do, and that is to check all the measurements while I'm fitting the frames and putting them in. Because I made a small mistake during making these frames, and that was I didn't put the waterline marker on all of the frames. So most of them have that small slot in there that marks the waterline, but not all. And I need to check that. And I also want to have a separate marker further down or up here to make a second marker so that I can check with the laser through the mold there, because the waterline is so high that the mold blocks it completely actually. And this all is just to make sure that everything is straight, square, on the right height and things like that. So I probably need to do some additional measurement pieces with the CNC and something like that. I have pretty good measurement points with these frames to put some additional CNC cut parts if I need to. So we'll see how that goes, but that is something I want to do here on the side before I start really gluing anything on their places. All right, I think that's almost enough for this video. There is still one more thing, and it is this pile right here. This pile is those veneers cut from those logs we cut down early on in March, and we finally got them done in July. And here they are magnificent, and it was very interesting process how these were made, and I'm gonna make a separate video of all that process quite soon, so stay tuned for that. That said, I'm gonna end this video right here. Of course, remember to subscribe to the channel to follow all this, and if you want to support the project, please go and check out the Patreon page down below. There's a few things available from there: early access without ads, some extra material, and weekly report from the shed. And for some of you, there is also possibility to buy plans for your dream house. So check that out. And massive thank you for all the patrons who had supported me this far. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next time. Bye bye.